We are smack dab in the middle of April, but there is no end of roster movement, including the Final Four mop making his way to the NBA. Maybe. So does it change our number one ranking? We'll find out.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We are your hosts. That's Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and we want to welcome you in, especially those of you that are dialed in with us every day. We'll call you the everydayers. We are so glad that you are here helping us build this thing. It's just so fun to chat college hoops together. In fact, we are so close to 800 subscribers on YouTube. This thing is growing and growing and growing. Andy, I just checked a second ago. It was at 797. So if we could get your grandma, my dad, and like a cousin or something, we're there. We'll be good. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Andy, coming up on the show today, we're going to take a look at both of our updated top 10s as they fall now. Folks, we won't be doing this every Monday as we do during the season, but there's been so much movement that it's made sense to do that for a while. At some point, we will taper that off and only do it on an as-needed basis. But so far, as needed has been every Monday. And then we will do our six-pack at the end, as we often do on Monday shows during the year. Usually it's with games. In the offseason, it's with typically transfer portal news, and that'll be the case today. So, Andy, let's start in with you. And I teased it off the top, and I'm curious where both of us have landed on this, but Adama Sanogo announced that he is indeed at least testing out the NBA draft process. Andy, given that news, do you still have the reigning national champion UConn Huskies number one in your top 10 this week?
I do not. I actually still have them where I had them before. So they're still in the top five. I still have the same top three programs that I had last week. And I think, honestly, that I had the week before. I don't think that my top three has changed unless I'm misremembering my very first week. But I have changed the order. So I'm going to go through the top three here, slightly different order, and then we'll kind of see that it gets a little bit wonkier after the top three. But for me, I'm moving Duke up from 3 to 1. I had Duke at third. Kyle Filipowski coming back is just such massive news for this team, a guy who was projected by so many to be a first-round pick. He's back. You also get Mark Mitchell back. You also get Tyrese Proctor back. I just feel like there's a lot of optimism around Jon Scheyer's team right now and where they're at and what they're building. And we'll see what they're able to supplant via the transfer portal if they are able to make any additions in that regard. That kind of has been a quiet spot for them up to this point. And
both in and out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they're not losing anybody, which is fantastic. I mean, they're losing a few guys to the draft, guys that we expected, Dariq Whitehead, Derek Lively. But I think for Duke, if they can maintain this, it's going to be hard when we're looking at this, a bit more seriously in September, October, as we're getting right to the start of the season. If Duke's roster pretty much looks like this, I have a really hard time seeing that there any way that they would be lower than like fifth, unless there's a handful of other teams that make some truly monstrous moves, which of course could happen. You never know. But for me, I still got Duke at 1, and I don't want to bury the lead anymore. I got UConn at 2, and I have had UConn at 2, I think, every single time. And the Adama Sanogo news does not change that. And part of the reason it doesn't change that is because we already know that Donovan Clingan is coming back. And certainly UConn is worse without Adama Sanogo. I don't want to pretend that if he does actually go through with the NBA process and goes into the league, that UConn is exactly as good as they were before. But to me, they're still one of the best teams in the country because Donovan Clingan is that good. And we have seen situations where a player departing has benefited both parties. I'll go to my roots at Gonzaga. Exactly. And a couple of years ago, when Filip Petrusev left after his sophomore year to pursue an opportunity to play professionally, he went to Serbia. He played in his home country and was the MVP of the league. Not a story that gets told all of that often. But meanwhile, while he went out and scored 23 points per game in Serbia, Drew Timme elevated from a backup center as a freshman to being the player that he was for the last 3 years. So we've seen that story before. Could it happen with Sanogo and Clingan at UConn? there's some similarities, possibly. They did lose a lean into the transfer portal. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but for the most part, I still have this UConn team at 2. And then I'll round out my top 3 because it's the same 3 programs. Like I said, Marquette drops from first to number 3. The only thing that's really changed for them, Omax Prosper, is in the NBA draft process. Not a huge surprise there. Still, as far as I understand, unless I misread, still could return to Marquette if he wants to. They don't really have a whole lot else that has changed. I still think Shaka Smart's team is in a really good spot. But losing him and with what Duke and UConn are at right now, I got Marquette a little bit farther down.
Yeah, Andy, and I think I said off the top, do you still have UConn at number 1? I'm projecting my own rankings onto yours. Forgive me for trying to make you me. I apologize for that. Like all of this reasoning is sound and makes a ton of sense to me. At least with those top 3, I mean, there's nothing I can do to say, boo, I disagree.
Right.
And I mean, it's a very logical move given what Duke did and UConn did. And based on where you had both those programs already to flop Duke up to number 1, especially given everyone they're going to have coming in as well. We so often expect Duke to lose a ton, but at this point, it's only Whitehead and Lively, certainly. And maybe Roach. So it makes a ton of sense for me. Moving out of the top 3, where do you go from there? Any teams moving up into that top 5 that you didn't have there before?
Yeah, the next 2 are probably my biggest movers, and then the rest of it is pretty similar to what it was last time with one exception. So the next 2 are the more exciting moves. Arkansas, to me, they were 6 last time. I think they were 10 and then 6 and now 4. And Arkansas has just made so many great additions in the transfer portal. So many talented players have come in. They got some more players that they're projected to potentially land. Another thing that we're teasing that we're going to talk about the third and final segment of today's show. But I think that Musselman's done a really good job of building what I think is going to be a really dangerous roster. They still got some work to potentially do in the front court, but this is a really dynamic backcourt for this team. And then at number 5 is a team that I did not have ranked, and you did. And this is now a team that I have brought all the way into my top 5, and that's the Spartans of Michigan State. And if you want to hear more about Michigan State, check out Friday's episode, Locked On College Basketball. Myself, Matt Sheehan, the host of Locked On Spartans, led off that show is fantastic. Really good insight into what has changed for them. They returned Tyson Walker. They returned Malik Hall. They have 3 players at 23 or older on the roster, those 2 guys, as well as AJ Hoggard. And then they have 3 incredible freshmen who are joining the team next year: Xavier Booker, Cohen Carr, Jeremiah Fears, a center, a wing, and a guard. All 3 players who might help Tom Izzo's teams right away. For me, it's hard to ignore Michigan State as the potential Big Ten frontrunner, and a team that, at least looking on paper right now in mid-April, which is way too early, but that's what we're doing, a team that has the recipe to potentially end a very, very long streak for the Big Ten and not making it, not winning a national championship.
Whose team did you say that was?
Michigan State.
Yeah, who's the head coach?
Tom Izzo.
Okay, enough said. Andy, what about teams 6 through 10 in your top 10?
Yeah, these are basically just all teams that I just bumped down a spot. Kansas moved from 4th to 6th. There was not really any changes. Bill Self really needs to add himself a back to the basket center. That's what he loves. That's what he wants. They did not land Jesse Edwards. He went to West Virginia. We'll talk about him later. As far as I know, they're still in the conversation for Hunter Dickinson, but there's a lot of teams in the conversation for Hunter Dickinson as well. And if they don't land themselves somebody up there, I don't think it's a death sentence for them, but it's something that could really help them. Houston, they moved from 5 to 7. Again, nothing really changed for them. Malik Wilson did enter the transfer portal. He is a high-profile player that is departing Kelvin Sampson's program, but I still like this team with the additions of LJ Cryer and Damian Dunn. UCLA goes from 7th to 8th. Not a big change there. Amari Bailey enters the NBA draft, but we're not surprised by that. Up to this point, Adem Bona has not done so yet, and they landed Lazar Stefanovic from Utah. They also landed a very, very high-level prospect from France as well. Not sure how much he contributes right away, but still a big addition for Mick Cronin. Final 2 teams, Creighton at number 9. I almost kicked them all the way out, but we don't know exactly what's going on with Creighton. Ryan Nembhard is in the transfer portal. He has not committed anywhere else as of yet. Baylor Shireman is back. They did add Isaac Trout from Virginia, but we need to know what's going on with Trey Alexander. We need to know what's going on with Arthur Kaluma. We need to know what's going on with Ryan Kalkbrenner until we can really pin down where these Blue Jays might be. And then my final team, another new addition. West Virginia. The Mountaineers, Bob Huggins, Take Me Home, Country Roads. for Huggy. They added Jesse Edwards from Syracuse. We talked about that. A huge addition for them. 2.7 blocks per game last year. Double machine. He really anchors the middle for West Virginia. Kerr Kriisa, very inconsistent guard, but really talented when he brings it all together. And as we're speaking right now, Isaac, they have Caleb Grill on campus. He is visiting. If Huggy can pull off Kriisa, Edwards, and Caleb Grill in the same few weeks stretch of the offseason, my, oh my, are they a team that's going to be in contention for a top 10 team throughout the season?
Going to make the Big 12 very interesting if that happens. And obviously we would revisit that here on the show. I think Creighton getting Shireman back, that's so big for them. And you had, just very quickly, you had two new teams come in. So who was it that fell out of your top 10?
Yeah, the two teams that fell out for me were Miami and Arizona. And for Miami, it wasn't really anything that happened. We're still not sure the situation with Isaiah Wong right now, and I think that's kind of has them in a bit of state of flux. But this is a really talented team, and I think they're going to be right on the cusp of being a top 10 team, depending on how the rest of the offseason goes, of course. And for Arizona, Azoulas Tubelis enters the NBA draft. It sure sounds like he's not planning to play any more college basketball. That's a big loss for Tommy Lloyd's team. They still have Umar Ballo down low. He's fantastic. They're in the mix to get Ryan Nembhard. I am a firm believer that there's a good chance that by the time folks are listening to this podcast, that Ryan Nembhard has already committed to Arizona. I think that is very, very likely to happen. Don't have any sources on that. Just think it's quite likely to go down. If that does happen, then Arizona may climb back in. But for now, they sit just outside. Isaac, I didn't move UConn, and I'm curious if you moved UConn. That's the conversation into our next segment. But before we do that, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Maybe you want to bet on the Tampa Bay Rays to continue to win every single baseball game that they are playing. You can check that out on FanDuel right now. And do not miss your chance to get that no-sweat first bet when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you again for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen every day. For you everydayers, tomorrow, we're going to continue to talk transfer portal updates. We're going to continue to have coverage on everything happening in college basketball. It is no longer a situation where the season ends and we just start previewing the next season. There is an official offseason in college basketball now with transfer portal moves and constant updates every single day. We're going to bring it to you every single day here on Locked On College Basketball. But for now, Isaac, I want to know what your top 10 looks like. And I want to know, same question I'm going to ask you. You kind of teased it already, but you still got them UConn Huskies up near the top after Adama Sanogo's potential, we should say, departure?
I do. I had been promising that even if Adama Sanogo left, I would still have the Huskies #1. And I am a man of my word, even if I go down with the ship. UConn Huskies #1 for me. Yes. As you said, Naheem Aline transfers to St. John's, the biggest splash. Well, we'll talk about him later. So, you know what? Let's just leave that behind. But, you know, we got to wait to see on Adama, on Sanogo, because as you said, he is in the draft, but could come back, hasn't been fully in. We already know that Jordan Hawkins is gone. That was expected. And so for me, listen, Andy, I don't need to relitigate it. It's everything you just said. I was even going to make that same Gonzaga comparison because I thought it was the perfect example of this. Like, just because a top guy leaves doesn't mean there's not someone who can fill in just as well. So I'll use a different example. Who's going to be my #2 team. Last year, we had Travion Williams and Zach Edey fill in the front court for Purdue. Travion Williams leaves. What happens? Oh, Zach Edey turns into the National Player of the Year. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Klingon, but he's that same kind of body type, that same skill set. Like, why couldn't he just have an absolute blow up this year for UConn? And so I've said I'm going to keep him here. I am. One thing I will say, they got to find somebody to do what Jordan Hawkins did. If they can do that, even a couple people to piecemeal that together, they'll be in good shape. If they struggle to find that production, that's when they would start falling down. But right now, based on what I think will come back, based on having Klingon, I'm in on the Huskies at the top. Already said it. I'm keeping Purdue second because, like you said, with several teams, nothing really has happened enough behind them or with them to make me move them. So Boilermakers stayed 2. I did move Duke up from 5 up to 3 based on everything you said. I mean, that three-headed monster of getting back Tyrese Proctor, who we already knew about, Kyle Filipowski, and Mark Mitchell. Yeah, give me that. And then when Duke is typically trying to work in all this fresh talent, they're not having to do that at as high a level. Now, they do take a little bit of a hit with losing Mackenzie Mbako last week, but it's because they get Kyle Filipowski back, right? So that's ultimately a net win. And obviously, as we learn more about the Mbako sweepstakes, we'll keep folks up to date on that. But as we alluded to when we were talking about your top 10, they've literally lost no one nor brought in anyone in the transfer portal. You don't expect that with really any team in this day and age, and especially with Duke, who has all these high-level players, many of whom, because there's so many high-level players, kind of sit on the bench and are like, all right, I'm out. I'm going to go play somewhere. We haven't seen that, and that's really interesting to me.
Well, Isaac, you have 2 of the same top 3 teams as me in Duke and UConn. I'm curious if we have 3 of the same top 5 teams. So I'd love to hear who you have at 4 and 5, and if we end up with 3 of the same top 5 teams in this go round of our top 10s.
Well, interestingly, no, at least in the top 5. My next one is still FAU. The only team that's changed in my top 4 is Duke. I had FAU at 4, and they're still there. The question marks become Elijah Martin and John L. Davis, who are both testing the NBA draft waters. But I think it's purely a case of, why on earth wouldn't you go test the NBA draft waters? And I fully expect both these guys to be back next season. By virtue of some other things, I have Marquette moving up from 6 to 5, Michigan State up from 7 to 6, Houston up from 8 to 7, Kansas up from 9 to 8. And that is all because I have Arizona falling from 3, tumbling all the way down to 9. And on the surface, it might seem a little hypocritical because it's similar to the situation that happens with UConn, where you have Azoulas, Tubelis in the draft, and you still have back half of your dynamic draft front court, in Umar Ballo. And I think Ballo is going to be great, but I don't think it's going to be as dynamic a front court as like the situation at UConn. I just think Tubelis was the more dynamic player of the 2. And again, I expect Ballo to be a Balla, especially if Nembhard comes, which I think, as you said, he ultimately does. But it's just too much for me. Now, I will say, I've said it before and I'll continue to say, I think Kriisa is addition by subtraction for them, just from a consistency standpoint, right? Like,
assuming they get Nembhard, I mean, they have to get a point guard. And that's the key. I think they're going to.
That's the key. They got to get Nembhard. And so, ultimately, and I skated by it. But let me say about Kansas, it sounds like they are the front runners to land Harrison Ingram. Ingram hosted several in-home visits over the weekend, and then like nowish is going to Lawrence, Kansas. If Bill Self can land him as
that's huge,
something of a Jalen Wilson replacement, that would be big time, and I'd vault them up at that point. Next, 10th, my one team moving from unranked to ranked is that Arkansas team. I mean, just bringing in an entire backcourt plus, right? Like he could start basically 5 small guys right now and run a little Grinnell College action. But with Jeremiah Davenport and Tremont Mark, Keon Menefield, Khalif Battle, and then, the El Ellis conversation that we'll have here in a second. A lot of it for me is twofold: to keep Arkansas here and maybe even move up. We know that Nick Smith Jr. is gone. We know that Ricky Council's gone. We know that Anthony Black is gone now. Does Devo Davis come back? He's testing the draft right now. If he's back, I'm going to bump Arkansas up. And when does Trevon Brazile get back? And what player does he look like when he does eventually come back? All of those things are going to help Eric Musselman's team a lot. And then the team that I moved out to move in the Razorbacks is Kentucky. And a lot of that for me is just, there's so many question marks right now. I know you've lost a couple guys 100% to the draft like Mr. Toppin. But there's several other guys testing. There's the Hunter Dickinson sweepstakes you talked about earlier.
Right.
I think a lot of that will be based on Sheboy, but they did, they've gotten some good news back this week. And so we'll wait to see what happens going forward. But right now there's just a few too many question marks to have them top 10 for me. Andy. The portal gives.
Yeah.
The portal taketh away.
It sure does.
Isn't that like a U2 song? Anyway, the portal keeps on giving. The portal keeps on taking away. And we've got a fresh 6-pack of mostly portal-related topics for you today. One that is very not, which is an unfortunate legal issue, one of which we've seen too many of in college basketball-related things recently. We'll talk about all that in just a second. All right, Andy Patton, we're going to close out today's show with our Portal 6-pack. Again, it's mostly a 5 Portal 6-pack plus one other thing, but we'll start with that other thing off the top just because it's a story been told too many times recently in college basketball.
Yeah, it sure is, Isaac. Mikey Williams, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the name or have maybe only heard it sparingly, Mikey Williams is a commit to Penny Hardaway and the Memphis Tigers. A really, really highly regarded high school player. He was extremely famous as a freshman in high school back in 2020, a YouTube sensation, 4 million followers on Instagram. High school career was still very good, but he didn't quite reach the number one prospect in the country, going to be the next LeBron. Like he never quite reached that threshold. Still ended up committing to Memphis and is expected to be a big time contributor for them. But unfortunately, he was arrested for charges of assault with a deadly weapon. It is yet another instance of gun violence affecting college basketball. And we're not gonna jump into a whole big thing about it, but I mean, we talked about it with Colin Dever in the New Mexico State situation in an episode a few months ago. We talked about, of course, the Brandon Miller and Alabama situation a handful of times throughout the season. We're continuing to see these instances. Right now, this Mikey Williams thing is very, very new. The extent of what we know is that there was an argument at what appeared to be, or what was Williams's house. He and multiple other people exited the house. Shots were fired after that. He matched the description of the shooter, has been arrested. That's kind of where we're at with it. Obviously, as we get more information, we will continue to kind of update on it. But it's clearly a issue that is continuing to impact college basketball throughout this entire last year. And it's unfortunate that it's something that needs to continue to be brought up and addressed, and hopefully will be something that will dwindle, because there's too many of these stories right now.
Too many stories indeed. Well, no way to make a real segue from a difficult story like that. So we'll just get right back to the transfer portal news.
Yep.
Sahvir Wheeler is one of those players who has left Kentucky, and he's a tiny guy. He is a man-to-man defensive stud, not the best and most efficient offensive threat, but he has picked up, Andy, interestingly, a crystal ball to the Washington Huskies.
This is zone action for Sahvir Wheeler. Huh?
It seems like a weird-ish fit to me. Obviously, Mike Hopkins and the Washington staff and team have to replace Menafield, who they, we just talked about a little bit ago.
Yep.
And they've lost multiple players to the portal. Now, obviously, listen, Sahvir Wheeler is a high-level guy, very athletic, and great passer, great facilitator. And so I don't want to think of going to Washington as a step down, but from Kentucky, what Kentucky typically is to what Washington typically is, it kind of is. And so, I mean, maybe this is a chance for Wheeler to really establish himself. Just think of what that could mean for helping Pac-12 just get an influx of high-level college basketball player. I think is a big win for what they are going to try to do. So we'll keep tabs on that, and if he ultimately lands there.
We've seen a handful of high-level transfers end up in the Pac-12 already. Dawes Amack at Cal is a big one. Oregon's bringing in a handful of really talented recruits, not transfers. But it'll be interesting to see if that helps the Pac-12 at all. We're also going to talk about a player leaving the Pac-12 momentarily. But first I want to talk about El Ellis. We mentioned El Ellis a little bit earlier. He picked up a crystal ball to Arkansas. And I cannot figure out how Muss is going to play all these guys. It's baffling to me. They added Keon Menafield from Washington. We already talked about him. They added Khalif Battle from Temple, Tremont Mark. They added from Houston. Now they're adding El Ellis. These guys all basically play the same position. And I'm not sure how that's all going to work. They also have one of the highest ranked. He's more of a point guard in Layden Blocker. He's a 2023 point guard coming in, and I'm curious if they can keep him. I'm curious if he's going to still want to go to a school that has been so invested in recruiting other guards to join the program. We know, of course, El Ellis, this is just a crystal ball. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's going there, but if he were to join a group,
he is a bucket, man.
Yeah, he's a fantastic. I mean, it's a great addition in a vacuum for Arkansas, but I'm not sure if you mentioned Grinnell College. Maybe that's what Muss wants to do, is just start 5 guards and just see if that works, because they got a whole bunch of them. But if they do land Ellis, man, they are hoarding talent in Fayetteville, and it might not be a bad idea, because I think that this is a really good group of guys they got coming in.
Hey, and that's only an hour and a half drive for me. I'm gonna have to go check.
You might have to. There you go.
Andy, I think this is a pretty unheralded land, but number 4 on today's 6-pack is TJ Bamba going from Wazoo, Washington State, to Villanova. He's switching coasts, and way to go, Wildcats. This is a way to help really fill themselves back in. Last year, 15.8 points per game, 3.7 boards, 37.2 from deep. 2 years left of eligibility. I mean, just even that kind of thing alone, getting a multi-year guy. And remember, they bring back the Wildcats dude, Justin Moore. This is great for Kyle Neptune. I think it sets them up well to, it's like some of these, when these teams you love to see up are down, it's not good for college basketball. And so I want to see Villanova get right back to the top. For me, I think TJ Bamba is an excellent addition to help them do just that.
Well, another transfer we want to talk about here is another Power 5 to Power 5 move for Tamar Bates. Tamar Bates is moving from Indiana to Mizzou. Wasn't a super productive player for Indiana last year, 6 points per game. He did shoot 37.5% from deep, so another high-level outside scoring weapon for Mizzou. They also added John Tanji from Colorado State. They're both combo guards. Again, teams are kind of hoarding the same type of player here, it feels. Tanji averaged 14.5 points on 39% shooting. So Mizzou adds 2 37+% three-point shooters in a matter of weeks. And want to shout out Tamar Bates to an incredible announcement photo that he posted of him in a Mizzou uniform. His daughter wearing a little tiger kind of onesie. It is his daughter looks like she's a year and a half, if that even. Very, very adorable picture. If you have not checked it out, just Google it. It's fantastic. One of my favorite transfer portal announcements that we have seen to date. And I think Bates is going to be another nice long-range addition for Mizzou.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis Gates did a bang-up job in year 1 at Columbia, and I would not expect to see, or I would not be surprised to see more of that in year 2. Well, Andy, wrapping up our 6-pack today, Rick Pitino is dropping St. Johnsiness all over the place. Listen, the Red Storm have 7 players outgoing in transfer portal. And in some ways, I'm not shocked by that at all. It's like Rick Pitino probably came in and was like, thank you for your service. Bye. But biggest news is they just landed national champion Naheem Aline, who we've talked about, was at Virginia Tech and then at UConn, and wasn't a starter at UConn, but made important contributions that were often indicative of it was aligned when Aline scored 8 or more points, the Huskies were pretty much going to win. And so good stuff there. He's brought 2 players with him from Iona, Coach Pitino has, and Dennis Jenkins and Cruz Davis. They've also landed Sean Conway from VMI. I'm sure there will be more on the way because Pitino's always working. He's got a bunch of scholarships still to dole out, and he is doing everything he can to bring guys in. So we'll keep our eyes on who all that is and what it looks like.
Yeah, Dennis Jenkins, for the record, 15.5 points, 4.9 assists last year for Iona. So a fantastic addition, 36% shooter as well. So a really, really nice player for Pitino to bring with him from Iona over to St. John's.
Russ Smith got any? I wonder if Russ Smith can still play.
Right. See what else they can find. Well, folks, once again, we want to thank all of you for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen every day. And for those of you who are with us every single day, keep checking the show out. Tuesday through Friday of this week, we got more transfer portal updates. We're going to talk some NBA draft stuff as well, some guys who have declared what that might look like for them. We'll continue to keep you updated on the best sport in the world here in mid-April as we get further and further away from last season, but of course, closer and closer to next season as well. Thank you all for listening. Peace out.